Welcome to Stokes County Boys, the podcast in which two friends discuss the place and things that made them who they are and who they are not. As always, this is Philip, joined by my good friend Patrick. How you doing, Patrick?
Hello. Doing okay, all things considered. How are you doing?
That's right. Doing all right. Hanging in there. Today's episode, we have a special episode. It's not a typical one. We had the pleasure of speaking with the editor of the Stokes News, Neill Caldwell. As I mentioned before, this isn't a typical episode. We won't be covering any pop culture today, so we'll just run the interview for you, and he kind of discusses what he's doing in the past year covering the area in which we grew up. So it was a nice little connection between where we came from and where he is right now. What's up, everybody? If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. 1, it's free. 2, it's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. 3, Anchor will distribute the podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. This is a big one because it's really hard. I've done it manually. It's not fun to get it on all those websites. And lastly, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. That's what we're doing, Patrick, and trust me, they'll pay us. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app and go to anchor.fm to get started. Now back to the show. Oh, one last thing before we get back to the show. Please go to our Anchor website at anchor.fm/scboys/support, and you can support the show for as little as 99 cents per month. What do you get in return? Well, the show keeps going, and the other thing, any supporter will get a shout out on the show, so you'll be entered into the record of the Stokes County Boys. And also, if you'd like, we'll reach out to you, and you can choose the topic of a future episode. Thanks in advance for your support. Now back to the show. Hi, Neil. How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
As good as can be, all things considered, you know.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I guess I'll introduce you to Patrick. Patrick's my friend. We both grew up in King, and we've been friends since we were 9 or 10 years old. So
it's been a while. It's been a while.
Part of my dealing with this pandemic and working at home and doing all this, I was like, let's start a podcast. I think part of what we're trying to do is actually figure out where it was we grew up and stuff about that, when you're a teenager, you don't really care about. You're always looking outwards instead of
That's true, yeah.
being reflective. But
Philip and I had a conversation when this stuff started, but then we realized we didn't really know any of the history of it. And so, we've been kind of diving in a little bit, when was it founded, who founded it, and just all that stuff. So, we really do appreciate you coming in and chatting with us here. We're not going to take up, too much of your time here, but
that's fine.
Yeah.
I've got the paper out, so the main challenge of Wednesdays.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that was another thing is we were finding I was pulling up the Stokes News to, we kind of, in a typical episode, in our first segment, we'll just cover something about King or Stokes County or some Walnut Cove, somewhere where we grew up. And, I was pulling up a couple of your articles, and I think I saw another one of your editorials, and I was like, well, I'll just reach out, see if we could pick your brain for a little bit, see what's going on now. So I guess we'll start off. And this is how I imagine, we're just starting off, but this is how I imagine asking all our guests, where do you consider your hometown? And can you tell us something interesting about growing up where you grew up?
Yeah, I love my hometown. I was born in Raleigh, but moved to a little town called Aberdeen when I was about 6 months old. Aberdeen was on US 1, about an hour south of Raleigh. It's next door to Pinehurst in Southern Pines, so Aberdeen is, of those three towns that are now kind of all grown together into one fairly good sized area, but Aberdeen was 2,000 people, the blue collar town of those three. We had a big Coca-Cola bottling plant. It was a good small town to grow up in, and still have great memories of that area. My mom worked for the newspaper there. It was a weekly paper. So I feel like, I've come full circle in a lot of ways because I started out at age 16 working for the hometown paper. And so I've kind of gone back to that here toward the end of my career. But it's been enjoyable. And I had a great experience. You know, I loved high school. And just, it was a good place to grow up. And it was part of a great family that had deep roots in that area. The Page family was fairly well known and had really kind of created the town of Aberdeen, and also Cary. So those are the two towns that the family founded. So very different in their scope, but and both on the railroad, which was really the key reason that they were created. So a good place, and some people are familiar with it because it's kind of on the way to the beach, for depending on which way you go. But yeah, it was a good place to grow up.
Did you say that you were 16 when you first got into the newspaper industry, so to speak?
Yeah, actually on my 16th birthday, believe it or not, because they told me, you know, I tried earlier and they told me I had to wait till I was 16. So literally on my 16th birthday, I went and showed them my driver's license, and they gave me a job. And the main reason, well, there are two reasons. One was my mom worked at the paper, and the other was because I had bought my brother's really nice camera outfit that had a 300 millimeter zoom lens. And so they needed somebody to shoot sports, you know, so that was kind of the main draw. So I became a sports writer, sports photographer, and did a little bit on the news side, but mostly sports. And I really did sports for the first dozen years of my adult career as well.
Where did you do for those years that you were working with sports? Where did you work with those?
I started out in Lexington.
Okay.
At the paper there, and then we went up to Asheville and was assistant sports editor up there for a couple of years, and then actually went back to Lexington as the news editor. So, and I've bounced around several other papers in the meantime, but it's kind of interesting to be back in a small weekly again, because it has its own appeal, which is part of the reason is it's not quite as stressful as working for a daily.
Mm-hmm. When did you begin working with the Stokes News?
I started the 1st of August, so it's just coming up on the first year anniversary.
Wow. Very cool. What brought you to Stokes County? What led to you being the editor here?
Well, we lived in Virginia for 12 years and then moved back the end of 2018, and I was without a job and was just looking, and found out about the job up in Stokes County. And the Stokes County News is owned by Adams Publishing, which is a company that has papers all over the country, but it's headquartered in Tennessee. And the Mount Airy's paper is kind of our main office. And so there's 6 papers in with Mount Airy, including Stokes. And so the editor of Mount Airy was the one who was hiring this position. So I sent him my resume, and I think I may have gotten an email back from him, but then at least a month went by. I didn't hear a word. So I thought, you know, well, they must have filled it or must have had somebody in mind or whatever. And finally, I think I may have checked back in with them just to see, and they're like, oh, yeah, we haven't moved forward on that yet. So I was like, oh, which was kind of interesting because the people in Stokes County were really feeling upset because the paper for those weeks was basically Surrey County stuff, because that's where the reporters were. And people in Stokes County were very hot. So when I did start work, and I finally interviewed and got hired fairly quickly at that point, but when I started, I heard a lot of that negative feedback, and I said, well, you know, from now on, it's going to be 100% Stokes County News. So, and I think I've stuck to that.
That's great.
So what have been some of your best moments in the past year covering Stokes County?
Well, it's been a learning experience. I will say that coming into the job, I really knew zero about Stokes County. So, you know, a lot of it even continues to be getting to know people, building relationships, and just learning about things. So the best part, at least for the first 6 months, I'll say, is just kind of showing up was enough, because people were, so pleased to see you that it didn't really matter what you wrote, that they were happy to have their event covered or their meeting covered or whatever. So, so it's been a very welcoming situation. I've enjoyed some of the events. Of course, we haven't had any in the spring or summer, but some of the things that are annual celebrations that people really enjoy, things like the Stokes Stomp, in Danbury, and there are several things in King that go on during the year, and the county fair and all that kind of stuff. So just kind of learning people and who does what, and trying to figure out the ins and outs of that has been the majority of my job. But it's been an up and down thing. There've been some troubling stories, as you've probably seen, and there've been some really wonderful stories. So that's kind of the nature of newspapers and all. And a lot of papers and media in general kind of focus on the negative, and I try to make sure that there's a balance of really kind of positive stories, because there are a lot of them out there and they don't get reported as often.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in an email. We talked about, I think it's in a future episode, maybe next week's, about the story you covered with I believe it was Reverend Hairston and the march and Walnut Cove, and yeah, I really enjoyed that. But yeah,
they had a kind of not really a march, but more of a protest or demonstration there that I really didn't know about, didn't hear about until after it happened. So then this one got scheduled, and this is one that's really more tied to that event that happened 53 years ago, whatever it was. So, and a lot of the people who participated in that march in 1968 were present for this one, and that was pretty cool. So, and they had a good turnout, and it was very positive. And Reverend Greg Harrison talked about how that first march came about, and he was one of the leaders of it, organizers. So it's great to have that kind of oral history be present, and that you can, as I said, learn more about what's happened in the past that brings us to this point. I think one of the more uncomfortable things for me is that this Stokes County is so white. I mean, it's about 95% white, and there's very little diversity. And I think that's held the county back in a lot of ways, and it's certainly presented its own challenges. But especially in this, this kind of national conscience raising right now for things like Black Lives Matter, it gives you a very challenging focus that you want to write about diversity, but it doesn't really exist. So it's most of the people of color in the county are in the Walnut Cove area. So I have tried to make sure that I keep that part of the county covered and given their fair share. So, but pretty much the rest of the county is pretty monochromatic.
So being a Stokes County boy, I live in Durham, and Philip lives in Chapel Hill now. But, being a Stokes County boy, my friends and colleagues down here are very quick to let me know whenever they hear anything at all about Stokes County.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about the unfortunate news that happened last month with Mike Falk, the owner of the 311 Speedway. I woke up to text messages from friends talking about his Facebook Marketplace post advertising the Bubba Road. And I was really pleased to see the letters to the editor in the Stokes News condemning this, and also calling out the county commissioners for their silence. How do you navigate sensitive topics like this as a news outlet during these very divided times? And also, how do you determine from like a logistical standpoint what letters to the editor that you choose to print?
Right. Well, to answer the second part first, basically, if it's from somebody in Stokes County or pertains to something going on in Stokes County, we'll pretty much run it unless it has something, obscene or inflammatory in it. I get letters from really all over the state, and I tend not to, even think about those, because we really want to, as I said, be all about Stokes County. So, if it's, I don't really care what the position is, but if it's a decently written letter, I'm glad to run it. But the whole situation with Mike is really interesting because latter part of last year, he really kind of dipped his toes into the local political scene for the first time and ran for county commissioner in the Republican primary and did pretty well and lost by 100 and so votes from being one of the two candidates that moved forward to the general election in November. He was third, and when one of the county commissioners resigned kind of suddenly, there were a lot of his supporters, Mike's supporters, who wanted him to be appointed to that empty seat on the county commission. That didn't happen, fortunately, probably. So it's very difficult because, my experience with Mike is that he's more concerned about green than white or black. I mean, he's really focused on his businesses and making money and that kind of thing. And so I think part of his deal is that he just wants the attention and he wants to be in the news and, on people's minds and in their posts on Facebook and other social media. I think that's part of it. So, but, clearly he went over the top. And I felt particularly taken because back when he started his season at the racetrack, I told him that we would do all we could to promote the races and put the results in the paper and all that. So when he posted these things, and the Bubba Road was just one of several that were beyond the pale to me, I just completely said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to give this publicity that he wants so badly when he's going to behave like that. So from a standpoint of personally, I felt like, I just felt like I should be kicking myself for kind of getting dragged into that. But in terms of journalism, I think it's, it's a pretty easy call when you have a local guy is on ESPN Sports Center and is in the Guardian and other papers in England and, on the AP Wire, going to every paper around the country. And it's both kind of exhilarating that that's happening, but also a little embarrassing that it's a negative kind of situation and this local person is acting like a knucklehead. So I felt like this pastor who was actually from Greensboro, who went to the track with a group of protesters, the Black Lives Matter folks, and kind of confronted Mike. To me, that was a great story. And I was glad to interview the pastor, not Mike, and really let the pastor tell his side of this encounter. So I felt like, I was covering the story and yet not focusing on Mike, but focusing on the response and the efforts of these very gracious, very Christian, loving people who had gone out there not to confront, the situation, but to really try to understand it. And to me, that was a really good way that it turned out, at least for the present moment.
So, $1 million question, and we're going to put you on the spot here, Neill. If you had to pick one place in Stokes County to eat, where would it be, and what would you order?
Gosh, that's a tough one. I haven't been everywhere yet. I was trying to think. I like John Brown's just because it's different. And so I've tried several things. Pimento cheese is kind of famous, and but to me, it's not as good as what they have in Lexington, so it's hard to compare that. But John Brown's would be a good experience for people, I think, just because it's kind of old school, and it's people are reading it that they won't do that to us. So cross my fingers that won't happen anytime soon. If we can make it to 2022, then we'll be celebrating our 150th anniversary in Stokes County. So
fantastic.
that would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
So, east of King, going the back way up to the park, like Moore Spring, that way. You go kind of north of the park around to Danbury.
Oh, okay.
And it's on that road.
Neill, thank you so much for spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. We really do appreciate you coming in and giving us some insight. We wish you nothing but the best with the Stokes News, and we're going to keep reading.
Well, great. It's kind of the situation with newspapers now that I almost feel like any day I could go in and they could say, all right, we're going to, stop the paper and not do it anymore. But I feel like as long as I keep it viable and interesting and people are reading it, that they won't do that to us. So cross my fingers that won't happen anytime soon. If we can make it to 2022, then we'll be celebrating our 150th anniversary in Stokes County. So
fantastic.
That would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
So,
yeah, well,
it's nice to meet both of you guys.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And
do this again.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Please, yes.
So that was our interview with Neill Caldwell, editor of the Stokes News. You can see what he's up to and everything he's writing on the stokesnews.com. I thought it was a great interview, Patrick. What about you?
Oh, absolutely. And please check out John Brown's General Store. To check out his recommendation for a good meal in Stokes County you can get. And Philip and I will also be discussing other places in Stokes County that provide a very good meal in an upcoming episode.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we're going to have to dig into that toot sweet very soon. In the meantime, you can always contact us by email stokescountyboys@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @scboyspod or Instagram @StokesCountyBoys. Let us know, what you thought of the interview. You can tell us your local spots to chow down, whether you live in the area or somewhere else. Feel free to tell us what you're up to. All right, Patrick. Hope you have a good one.
You too. Bye, guys.
Right. Bye.